The hill stands alone, broad-shouldered and restless beneath the clouds. This is not a gentle landscape. Its slopes are steep, its ground uneven, thick with heather and coarse grass that hides stone and peat. Paths twist through hollows and sudden drops, streams cut deep through the soil, glinting darkly between the tussocks. On clear days, the views reach for miles, but the weather can turn without warning. To walk here is to feel both exposed and enclosed, surrounded by open space, yet always under the watch of the hill itself. For centuries, stories have gathered here, of faith and fear, of poverty and suspicion, of people accused and condemned, and of a time when belief itself could decide a person's fate. Today, for Halloween, I'm travelling into the shadow of Pendle Hill to uncover what happened here in 1612 and how the echoes of that year still shape the legends that drift through these valleys. This is the story of the Pendle Witches. For most of us, the word witch summons an image shaped by centuries of superstition in a blend of fairy tale, theatre and fear. A dark figure clad in long black clothes, a hooked nose, wrinkled skin, a pointed hat, or perhaps a young woman dancing under a full moon, whispering enchantments. From the crones of medieval woodcuts to Shakespeare's secret black and midnight hags, to the green-skinned caricatures of modern films, the witch has always been something other. She's been a figure of horror and a symbol of rebellion, the embodiment of evil or a scapegoat for it, depending on who was telling the tale. But in the early 1600s, the word witch didn't belong to stories. It belonged to the law. 1604 saw the enactment of the third Parliamentary Act in England against witchcraft, following legislation in 1542 and 1562. To be called a witch was to stand accused of working harm through unnatural means, of bringing illness, loss, bad luck, and even death. And those accused were rarely mysterious strangers or powerful enchantresses. They were, more often than not, people on the edge of their communities. Picture a woman living here in 1612. She's maybe 60 years old. She's a widow. Her cottage is small and draughty, smoke rising from a fire fed with damp peat. She has no money, a family to feed, and she understands which herbs ease pain or settle a fever. She is a cunning woman, one who knows charms and cures, and her skills are a tool that can be traded in this dark corner of the land. They can also lead to jealousy and fear. If her neighbour's crop fails after she's been refused help, or a child falls ill after she's muttered a complaint, suspicion begins to grow. Whispers follow. And in a time when misfortune demanded an explanation and when belief in the devil's hand was real, those whispers could become deadly. It was among people like this, the poorest in their parish, the least protected, that the tragedy of the Pendle Witches began. Elizabeth Sothern and Anne Whittle lived within walking distance of each other in the shadow of Pendle Hill. They were both poor, both widowed, they both had families to look after, and they were both cunning women. If a cow was ill or something precious had been lost, it was to Elizabeth or Anne that people would turn. It's worth remembering that not only did their neighbours believe that these women had powers, Elizabeth, Anne, and their families believed it too. What they could do was as real to their community as the weather, as night following day, and they were needed. Doctors and priests were not always available or affordable for ordinary folk, but the cunning woman would be. The reason we know so much about the Pendle Witches is because of one book, written after the trials by Thomas Potts, the clerk of the court. The Wonderful Discovery of Witches in the County of Lancaster is a useful but frustratingly biased work. In it, Elizabeth is renamed Demdike, Anne becomes Chattox, and both are painted as wrinkled, decrepit, and dangerous. Potts clearly frames the narrative to show the witches in the most dreadful light, with the judges lauded as honest and brave. Demdike lived with her widowed daughter, also called Elizabeth, and her grandchildren James, Alison, and Jennet Devis. Chattox lived with her married daughter, also called Anne. On the 18th of March 1612, Alison Devis met a pedlar on the road near Colne. His name was John Law. She asked him for some pins, items that held significance in folk magic, and when he refused, she cursed him. Moments later, Law collapsed, suffering what seemed to be a stroke. It was the kind of coincidence that in another time or place might have been dismissed as misfortune, but not in Pendle, and not in 1612. When local magistrate Roger Nowell heard what had happened, he met with John Law and Alison, who were both convinced that her curse had caused his illness. And while she begged forgiveness, Nowell had to investigate. In a very short space of time, Demdike, Elizabeth, Alison and James Devis were rounded up for questioning. Chattox and her daughter soon followed, and Demdike, Chattox, Alison and Anne were sent to Lancaster Castle to await trial. After what Potts describes as a great assembly of all the most dangerous, wicked, damnable witches at Demdike's home on the 10th of April 1612, 7 more people were accused of witchcraft and sent to the castle. Elizabeth and James Devis, Alice Nutter, Catherine Hewitt, John and Jane Bulcock, and Alice Gray. Alice Nutter's involvement in the whole scenario was strange. She had been married to a yeoman farmer, not rich, but comfortably well off, and whilst she was a widow and an older woman, she wasn't known as a cunning woman like Demdike or Chattox. Even Thomas Potts found it hard to demonise Alice in his account of the trials, saying that she was of good temper, free from envy or malice. A statue of Alice Nutter, her head slightly bowed, her hands in chains, was unveiled in Roughly, the village she came from, in 2012. I can't imagine how utterly terrifying the experience of being questioned and transported to a dark cell in a vast, unforgiving castle must have been. Those accused of witchcraft would be stripped and searched for telltale marks, often nothing more than bruises or moles. There was no legal support for the prisoners, no advice, and while torture was prohibited, violence and mistreatment were rife. So what exactly had these supposed witches done? We know that Alison had cursed John Law, but there were now 11 people facing trial for their lives. Responsibility for as many as 15 deaths was laid at the door of the Pendle Witches. Men, women and children allegedly murdered with more said to have been bewitched. They had fashioned clay into the form of their enemies and dug up teeth from corpses to use in harmful rituals. They had caused cows to fall ill and die. They had ruined ale and spoilt milk. They had consorted with familiars, Tib, Fancy, Ball and Dandy, and they had ridden horses until the poor beasts collapsed from exhaustion. They had given up their souls to the devil. King James had come to the throne only a few years before the Pendle trials, and his fear of witchcraft ran deep. In 1597, while still King of Scotland, he had written a book called Demonology, which was a detailed warning about the devil's servants living among the faithful. He believed witches were not only sinners, but traitors to God and crown, conspiring with Satan to bring chaos to the kingdom. Under his rule, witchcraft was not superstition, it was treason. This royal obsession filtered down through every level of authority, from judges and magistrates to parish constables and neighbours. To doubt witchcraft was to doubt the king's own belief. And in a poor, fearful community, that belief became a weapon, a way to explain tragedy, to settle scores, or to show loyalty to both church and crown. It was in that atmosphere that the Pendle witches were brought to trial. Not all of them lived to face it. Old Demdike, Elizabeth Southerns, never left Lancaster Castle alive. She died in the cells before her trial began, blind and frail, imprisoned in the cold and the dark through the spring and summer of 1612. Thomas Potts dismissed her death as the devil claiming his own. But it's far more likely she succumbed to illness and neglect, an innocent victim of a system already sure of her guilt. In August 1612, the remaining prisoners were led through the gates of Lancaster Castle. The trial would take place in the Shire Hall under the gaze of the King's representatives, Sir James Altham and Sir Edward Bromley. There were no lawyers to defend the accused, no right to call witnesses. Their fate rested on the words of neighbours, on their own confessions, and, most devastatingly, on the words of a child. 11-year-old Jennet Devis, the daughter of Elizabeth and granddaughter of Demdike, stood before the court, testifying against her own family. Thomas Potts records that Jennet had to stand on a table so the judges could see her. When asked to identify those who practice witchcraft, she pointed first to her mother, then to her brother James, and to the others she had named. Her evidence was calm, detailed, and, to the judges, utterly convincing. She spoke of gatherings at the family home, of feasts and familiars, and of clay figures made for malice. Potts presents this as divine justice, a child's innocence exposing evil. But what we can see now is something far more human and far more tragic. A frightened girl, coached or coerced into condemning the only people who had ever cared for her. By the end of the proceedings, 10 of the accused were found guilty. They were sentenced to hang. On the 20th of August 1612, the condemned went from their cells to Gallows Hill. There were no last words recorded, no dying confessions, and no unearthly signs or wonders as they climbed the ladder. Only the creak of rope and the murmur of the watching crowd. Their bodies were buried in unmarked graves, their families scattered, And the story of the Pendle witches passed into history and legend. But stories like this never stay buried. Pendle Hill still rises stark against the sky, the same slopes, the same restless wind, and a past that hasn't left it. Faces appear in the mist. Whispers carry on the wind. Lantern lights are seen moving in the distance with no hand to guide them. Those who walk the hill at night speak of shapes drifting through the fog, of dark, stooped figures that seem to vanish when approached. A cloaked, hooded man appears and then dissolves into mist. Others hear voices, snatches of laughter, sobbing, or their own names called softly from behind. There are hollows where cold spots linger even in summer, and some claim to hear a woman's low crying by a certain stream that runs through the gully. Locals say the witches are most restless in the fog and rain, when the cloud drops low and the world feels smaller, pressed close beneath the weight of the hill. They call it witch weather when the air itself feels thick with memory. Some even choose to avoid the hill after nightfall, fearful of what might emerge from the dark. Pendle has become a place of pilgrimage for ghost hunters and curious travellers, with crowds of people and cars filling the streets of Barley Village, especially at Halloween. They walk the Pendle Witches' Way, a 48-mile route that follows the gruelling journey taken by the accused to Lancaster. They stop at the 10 cast-iron tercet waymarkers, one for each person hanged, on which the poem The Lancashire Witches by Carol Ann Duffy is inscribed. They visit gift shops to buy candles and cups with witches on them. They take ghost tours and midnight walks, their cameras picking up drifting orbs, thermal flares and strange voices caught on EVP. One recording captured what sounded like a name, Alison, though perhaps that was only the wind. And once, during a séance held on the hill, an old human tooth dropped onto the centre of the table. It was found to be from an adult of about 40, but no one could explain how it had happened. Could these phenomena be caused by the spirits of the Pendle witches? I've spoken before about how strong emotions might leave an impression on a place, or tragic events an echo. But those who are condemned as witches didn't die on Pendle Hill. According to the evidence at their trial, they carried out some wicked and dangerous magic here, calling on dark powers to end the lives of others. Would that be enough to bind them to this site? Or is it that with their lives cruelly taken by a state and system weighted against them, denied justice, denied respect, denied even a decent burial, the Pendle witches simply returned to the place they called home? It's a home that has seen other tragedies too. In 1893, a shooting party found the body of an unidentified middle-aged man on Pendle Hill. Respectably dressed, he had no identification on him, blood around his mouth, and appeared to have lain there undiscovered for several days. In 1901, a young man called Albert Higginson was crushed to death in a rock slip while working on the hill. And in February 1944, an American pilot, Flight Officer John Runnels, crashed his P-47 Thunderbolt into the hillside during a storm. His body was found among the wreckage. Some say you can still see the shadow of an aircraft sweeping silently through low cloud, or the faint figure of an airman standing alone in the mist before fading into nothing. The landscape of Pendle holds these memories close, pressed into the peat and stone. But the tale of the witches rises to the surface time and again. For more than 400 years, the air here has been heavy with stories of spells, spite, suffering, and spirits. The wind that moves through the heather today is the same wind that once rattled cottage doors and whispered of the devil's work. But it wasn't the devil that took the Pendle witches. It was people. People who were afraid, people who were jealous or ambitious, and perhaps people who believed they were doing what was right. That, I think, is what's most haunting about Pendle Hill. Not the ghosts that flicker in the mist, but the reminder of how easily fear can turn neighbours into accusers and belief into a weapon. The whispers that drift across this landscape carry more than legend. They carry the echo of our own capacity for cruelty. And beneath the restless ground, the weight of all that was lost still moves, softly, as the hill keeps watch. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to keep exploring the places where the past still whispers, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me again somewhere in the hidden realms.